I arrived at the house and found it empty, just a cruel note on the door. It said I should make a life on my own. I am Leonora, 78 years old, a former pharmacist with a heavy hand and a clear mind. They thought they left me in ruins, but they forgot to check under the kitchen floor. The cab drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust on the unpaved street, and I stood right there, in front of the ochre facade that I knew better than the lines on my own hands. The silence was the first thing that didn't fit. In that house, there was always noise. The television blasting at full volume, which my daughter-in-law Jessica liked to keep on since dawn. The screams of my grandkids fighting over the remote control, or the sound of pots clashing. But that afternoon, the silence was so heavy it crawled into my ears and buzzed in my head. I was coming back from spending 3 days in the next town over, visiting my sister Edith, who was suffering from sciatica. I had left with only the clothes on my back and a small carry-on bag. Roger, my son, had kissed my forehead before putting me on the bus, telling me, "Rest easy, Mom. We will take care of everything here." And boy, had they taken care of it. I put the key in the lock. It turned with shocking ease, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled, or as if the door no longer guarded anything worth protecting. I pushed the old wood and the usual creak echoed in the hallway, but this time the echo was monstrous. There was nothing. The entryway, where the mirror cabinet and the ceramic umbrella stand used to be, was deserted. Only a rectangular mark remained on the wall, a ghost of dust where the mirror had hung for 20 years. I felt a sudden chill, a sharp pain in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. I walked slowly, dragging my orthopedic shoes, my heart beating against my ribs like a caged bird. "Roger," I called out. Even though I already knew the answer, my voice bounced off the bare walls. I moved toward the living room. They had taken everything. The green velvet sofa, the coffee table, the heavy drapes I had sewn myself a decade ago. On the floor, pieces of newspaper and old masking tape were the only witnesses to the escape. This wasn't a robbery. Thieves leave chaos behind. They rummage through drawers, break glass. This had been a move, a methodical move, planned and executed with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. And it seemed the tumor was me. It was on the kitchen door where I found the note. It was taped at eye level with a piece of black electrical tape. It was a page torn hastily from a notebook. I recognized Jessica's sharp, nervous handwriting. "Things got difficult, and we don't all fit in the new place. You have always been strong. We hope you find your way. Mom, please don't look for us. We need to start from scratch without burdens." I read the note once, twice. By the third time, the letters began to dance because tears of rage blurred my vision. It wasn't sadness I felt. I swear to you on my mother's memory. It was a white-hot fury. The kind that climbs up your spine and makes your ears burn. Without burdens. That is what they called me. I who gave them the roof they slept under. I who sold the downtown pharmacy, my beloved apothecary, to pay off Roger's gambling debts 15 years ago. I who took care of the kids when Jessica said she was depressed and went shopping all day. I dropped to the kitchen floor because my legs could no longer hold me. The tiles were cold. I looked around. They had taken the stove, the refrigerator, even the light bulbs from the fixtures. They only left the trash, an old, worn-out broom in a corner, and a pile of black bags filled with clothes I recognized immediately. They were my dresses, my coats, my shawls. They had tossed them there like dirty rags. I sat on the worn floor for what felt like an eternity. I thought about Roger, my only son, a 45-year-old man who never quite learned how to tie his own shoes, always letting himself be carried by the current. Or rather by whatever woman was standing next to him. Jessica never loved me. From the very first day she stepped into this house, she looked at me the way you look at an old piece of furniture that ruins a modern aesthetic. "She smells old," she would say, when she thought I wasn't listening. But they underestimated Leonora. They thought that because I had white hair and walked slowly, my brain had shrunk too. They forgot I was a pharmacist for 40 years. I know how to measure. I know how to weigh. And above all, I know how to observe. I know the difference between a remedy that cures and a poison that kills slowly. And they had been feeding me poison in teaspoons of contempt for years. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. The skin on my hands is thin as rice paper, covered in age spots, but underneath, there is still hard bone. I took a deep breath, smelling the dust and the dampness of the empty house. "Very well, Roger," I said aloud to the vacant room. "Very well, Jessica. You played your hand. Now it is my turn." I rolled onto my knees, groaning a little from the pain in my joints, and crawled toward the pantry. It was a small closet inside the kitchen where we kept the grains, the canned goods, and the dishes we hardly used. It was empty, of course. They had taken even the cans of tuna. But what they didn't know, what no one else knew except my late husband Arthur and me, was that this house held secrets. Arthur was a distrustful man. He didn't believe in banks. "Paper money burns, Leonora," he would always tell me. "Gold is eternal." I went into the pantry. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust floating in the air. I headed to the darkest corner, right where a sack of potatoes used to sit, a sack we never moved. There in the corner, the wooden floorboards looked identical to the rest. Pine wood darkened by years and wet mops. I pulled out of my purse the only blunt object I had, a small metal nail clipper and a steel file. It wasn't the ideal tool, but desperation sharpens your wits. I looked for the groove between the third and fourth board counting from the left wall. My fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. What if they had found it? What if, while moving things, while dragging the furniture, they noticed that this board sounded hollow? My heart stopped for a second at the mere possibility. If they had taken that, then I truly was dead. Then I truly would be the helpless old woman they wanted me to be. I slid the file into the groove. I used it as a lever. The wood creaked, a dry sound like a bone breaking. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my arthritic fingers. The board gave way. It lifted just a few inches, enough for me to slip my fingers in and pull. The smell of damp earth and confinement hit my face. I set the board aside and stared into the dark hollow between the foundation. I reached in, feeling around in the pitch black. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I let out a breath that seemed to empty my lungs entirely. There it was. I pulled the handle of the metal box. It was an antique toolbox, heavy, rusted on the outside, but hermetically sealed. I dragged it out with sheer effort, pulling it into the kitchen light. I sat back down with the box between my spread legs, as if I were about to give birth to my own future. I opened it. The hinges shrieked, protesting the years of inactivity. Inside, wrapped in blue velvet cloths that were once part of an evening gown from my youth, were the coin tubes. Double eagles. Pure gold pieces. Arthur had bought them one by one, month after month, during the 30 years we ran a prosperous business. "For our old age, Leo," he would say, "so you never have to beg anything from anyone." I unwrapped one of the tubes and let the coins spill into my lap. They gleamed with a brilliance that seemed to carry its own light, a heavy, intense yellow that contrasted with the misery of the empty house. $25,000 in face value, maybe $500,000 at today's market price for the metal. A fortune that fit in a shoebox. Roger and Jessica had taken the flat-screen television they bought on credit. They had taken the blender. They had taken the threadbare rugs, but they had left behind freedom. They had left behind power. I picked up one of the coins and squeezed it in my fist until the edges dug into my palm. The pain made me feel alive. It made me feel dangerous. I stood up with difficulty, hugging the box to my chest. I wasn't going to stay there crying. I wasn't going to check into a charity home. I wasn't going to call the police to report elder abandonment, because that would only make me look weak and invite pity. And I, Leonora, did not want anyone's pity. I looked at Jessica's note one more time, still taped to the door. I ripped it off with a sharp motion, crumpled it in my free hand, and shoved it into my jacket pocket. That note would be my fuel. Every time I felt my strength waver, every time loneliness tried to bite at my heels, I would read those words. "We hope you find your way." Oh, yes, I muttered, and my voice was no longer shaking. It sounded hoarse, firm. Just like when I used to throw out the drunks who came to bother us at the pharmacy. I am going to find my way, and when I do, you are going to wish you had never crossed it. I walked out of the kitchen and headed toward the pile of garbage bags where my clothes were. I started digging. I needed a better coat because the night was going to be cold. I found my gray wool coat, the one Jessica said made me look like a beggar. I put it on, buttoned it up with dignity, and straightened my back. I packed the metal box into my small carry-on, taking out the underwear and the knickknacks I had brought from my sister's house to make room. The weight of the suitcase was now considerable, but I didn't care. It was a sweet burden. I walked toward the front door. The empty house no longer felt like a corpse to me, but rather a shell I had just hatched from. Before leaving, I stopped at the threshold. I looked back into the dark interior. "Goodbye, house," I said. "You were good to me, but you got infected." I closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. Why bother? There was nothing left inside worth stealing. And everything that mattered was walking right out into the street with me. Evening was falling, and the streetlights were starting to flicker. I walked to the main avenue to look for a cab. I wasn't going to my sister's house. She was a good woman, but she had a loose tongue, and she would end up telling someone where I was. I needed to disappear in order to be reborn. A cab pulled up. The driver, a young kid blasting his music, looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Where to, Grandma?" The grandma part annoyed me, but I let it slide. I stroked the suitcase on my lap, feeling the outline of the metal box through the fabric. "To the Imperial Hotel," I said. The kid looked at me in surprise. The Imperial was the most expensive and elegant hotel in the city, a place where foreign tourists and politicians stayed. "Hey lady, that place is really pricey. Are you sure? There are cheaper motels around here if you want." I stared him dead in the eyes through the rearview mirror. I lifted my chin and gave him a half smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but shows you aren't playing around. "Son, I didn't ask you for the price," I told him. "I told you the destination. Drive." The kid swallowed hard, nodded, and put the car in gear. As the city rolled by the window, lights and shadows blending in the twilight, I started running numbers in my head. Not just money numbers, but time numbers. I was 78 years old. Maybe I had 5, 10, or 20 years left. If I had the genetics of my Aunt Gertrude, who made it to 100, I had enough time. Time to establish myself, time to transform, and above all, time to prepare a lesson my son and his wife would never forget. They thought they were throwing me in the trash. They didn't know I was a seed. We arrived at the hotel. The doorman, a tall guy in an impeccable uniform, looked at me with doubt when he saw my old suitcase and my exhausted appearance. But I walked straight to the reception desk with my head held high, striking the marble floor with my orthopedic shoes as if they were combat boots. "Good evening," I said to the receptionist, a blonde girl who looked at me with the same condescension Jessica used. "I need a suite for a month to start." "Ma'am," she began, using that syrupy voice people use to talk to the elderly or slow children. "Our rates are quite high, and we require a credit card or a cash deposit up front." I opened my purse. I didn't pull out the gold. Of course, that would have been reckless. Instead, I pulled out a wad of cash I kept for medical emergencies in a secret coin purse. The little that was left of my pension that I hadn't handed over to them. They were old bills, but legal tender nonetheless. I placed 2 crisp $100 bills on the counter, enough for one night and a generous tip. "Tomorrow, I will go to the bank to exchange some currency." I lied with absolute naturalness. "For now, take it out of this and have dinner sent up to my room. I want lobster and champagne." The girl's eyes went wide. The change in her attitude was immediate. Money has that magical effect of erasing wrinkles and straightening spines in the eyes of others. "Right away, ma'am. Under what name should I register the room?" I hesitated for a second. "Leonora." That name sounded like the woman who swept and cooked for a pair of ingrates. That woman had been left behind in the empty house. "Put it under Mrs. Montgomery," I said, using my maiden name. The one I hadn't used in 50 years. Leonora Montgomery. As I rode up in the elevator with golden mirrors and red carpet, I saw my reflection. My hair was a mess. I had bags under my eyes, and my coat was a little too big on me. But my eyes were shining. They gleamed with an intensity I hadn't seen in decades. I touched the pocket where the crumpled note rested. "Find your way." "I already found it," I whispered as the elevator doors opened to a brightly lit, silent hallway. "And it is a road paved with gold." That night, I slept on Egyptian cotton sheets with the metal box under my pillow like a loaded gun, dreaming not of the past, but of the exquisite revenge of living well. Sunlight filtered through the heavy burgundy velvet curtains, drawing a line of fire across the rug. I woke up, startled, my heart galloping in my chest, blindly reaching for the peeling wall of my bedroom in my son's house. But my fingers only found soft sheets, the kind that caress your skin instead of scraping it. It took me a few seconds to remember the Imperial Hotel, the suite, the escape. The first thing I did was slip my hand under the pillow. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the toolbox, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. There was my life. There was my Arthur. I sat up in the bed, which was so big an entire family could have slept in it, and ordered breakfast. When the waiter came in, pushing a cart with silver platters and fresh coffee, he looked at me out of the corner of his eye. He was surely wondering what an old lady with messy hair and a worn flannel nightgown was doing in a room that cost more than he made in a month. I left a generous tip on the tray, a crumpled bill that I smoothed out with dignity. "Thank you, young man. Please clear the plates in an hour. I do not wish to be disturbed." When he left, I locked the door and slid the chain into place. It was time to take inventory. I dumped the contents of the box onto the white duvet. The gold coins tumbled out with a dull, heavy clinking, a sound that no plastic card can ever imitate. I counted them again, one by one, stacking them in columns of 10, just like I used to do with the pills at the pharmacy counter. 50 double eagles. Heavy, beautiful, with Lady Liberty looking back at me with pride. I did the mental math quickly, adjusting for inflation and the market price I had heard on the radio a few days ago. It was a lot of money, a tremendous amount. But I had a problem. I couldn't walk into a supermarket and pay for a gallon of milk with a pure gold coin. I needed liquidity, and I needed to be discreet. I got up and walked over to the full-length mirror. What I saw made me want to cry, but I swallowed the tears because the time for crying had ended yesterday on the floor of an empty kitchen. The woman in the mirror was small, hunched over. Her white hair, yellowed from the cheap shampoo Jessica bought to save a few bucks, hung sadly over her shoulders. The clothes swallowed me. I had lost weight these last few years, eating the leftovers and watery soups they served me. My hands shook a little. "You look like a scarecrow, Leonora," I told myself out loud. But then I stepped closer to the glass and looked myself in the eyes. They were dark, sunken into a web of wrinkles, but the fire was still there. The gaze of the pharmacist who could spot a morphine addict from the front door of the shop. The gaze of the woman who had managed the books of a business for 40 years without losing a single cent. Society has a secret they don't tell you until you turn 70. You become invisible. To the world, an older woman is a nuisance, a piece of furniture, or, in the best-case scenario, a sweet little granny who bakes cookies and doesn't understand anything. You stop being a person with desires, with intelligence, with malice. You become part of the landscape. Jessica and Roger had bet on that invisibility. They thought I would dissolve into thin air without their charity. "We are going to use that to our advantage," I murmured, running a finger over my sagging cheek. "If they want to see a harmless old lady, that is exactly what they will see, until it is too late." I took a shower with scalding water using the hotel's perfumed soaps. I scrubbed my skin until it turned red, washing away the smell of confinement and sorrow. I put on my best dress, the black one I wore to church even though it was missing a button and the hem was fraying. I tucked 3 gold coins into my coin purse, wrapped carefully in handkerchiefs. The rest went back into the box, and the box went into the room's safe. I set the combination to my late husband's date of birth. I left the hotel with my cane and my purse. The morning sun hit my face, but this time I didn't feel helpless. I felt like a hunter. I took a cab to the historic downtown, to the jeweler's district. I knew exactly where to go. Not to the massive stores with bright display windows and security guards at the door. I was looking for Sapphire Alley, a narrow walkway where the old shops smelled of wood and deals sealed with a handshake. I walked into Reliance Jewelers. The name was an irony, of course. The owner, a bald man with magnifying glasses hanging around his neck, didn't even look up from his newspaper when I walked in. "Good morning," I said with a trembling voice, feigning more weakness than I actually felt. "We don't buy costume jewelry, lady," he replied without looking at me, turning a page. I approached the glass counter, leaned on my cane, and pulled out one of the handkerchiefs. I untied the fabric slowly, with clumsy movements letting the silence grow thick. When the gold coin gleamed against the scratched glass of the counter, the man slammed his newspaper down. His eyes widened behind the thick lenses. Excuse me, mother, I didn't see clearly." His tone changed instantly. It became oily, sickeningly sweet. "Let me take a look at that." He picked up the coin and placed it on his digital scale. He examined it with a loupe. I didn't take my eyes off him. I knew about scales. I knew how they could be rigged with a simple tilt of the table or an uncalibrated weight. "It is a pretty piece, yes," he said, trying to sound uninterested, "but the market is down today. Gold fluctuates a lot. I can give you $800 for it, and I am doing you a favor because it is obvious you need some help." I let out a dry chuckle, an old woman's cough that hid a laugh of pure contempt. 800. The coin was worth at least 2,500 at the current exchange rate. "Young man," I said, straightening my back and dropping the senile old lady mask for a second. "I was a pharmacist for 40 years. I know what a gram weighs, and I know what my gold is worth. That coin is a 1933 piece, 90% pure. Gold closed up on the market yesterday. If you want to scam someone, wait for a tourist to walk in." The man blinked, stunned by the shift in my tone. He looked me in the eyes and saw there was no fear, only calculation. 2,000, he said, the syrupy voice gone. 2,300 in cash, large bills, and I have 2 more right here. If you treat me fairly, I will return with others. If you try to rob me of a single dime, I will go see Mr. Gregory on the corner. He always gave me a fair price." The jeweler swallowed hard. The mention of his competitor made up his mind. 2,200 each. That is my final offer. "I have to resell them, ma'am. I have to eat too." "Deal," I said, slipping back into my role of a fragile old woman. $6,600, and a little velvet pouch to carry the money in, please. I don't want to get mugged. I walked out of the jewelry store half an hour later with a heavy purse and a light heart. $6,600. It was more money than Roger had made in the last 2 years with his failed business ventures. I walked down the pedestrian street, dodging people rushing by, staring at their phones. They bumped into me, brushed me with their bags. They didn't even apologize. To them, I was an obstacle on the sidewalk, a slow old woman blocking the path of progress. I stopped in front of a display window. It was an elegant boutique, the kind where they don't put price tags on the clothes because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. There was a charcoal gray wool-tailored suit, classic cut, flawless, and a camel coat that screamed authority. The 2 salesgirls, young and painted up like dolls, were chatting behind the counter. They saw me walk in, and their eyes swept over my old clothes, my worn orthopedic shoes. They went back to their conversation without even greeting me. "Excuse me," I said. "We will be right with you," one of them said without looking up from her phone. I walked over to the gray suit. I touched the fabric. "Ma'am, please don't touch if you aren't going to buy. The fabric is delicate," the other girl yelled from across the room. I smiled. It was time. I pulled the wad of cash out of my purse. Not all of it, just enough to show the thickness, the distinct color of high-denomination bills. I started counting them absent-mindedly, like someone checking a grocery list. The silence in the store was absolute. The 2 girls froze. The sound of crisp bills rustling was the only language they understood perfectly. "Oh, I am so sorry, ma'am," said the one who had yelled at me, rushing over with a fake smile plastered on her face. "We didn't recognize you. Are you looking for something in particular? We have some gorgeous sets that just arrived from Italy." I looked at her coldly, lowering imaginary glasses down my nose. I want that suit, and the coat from the window. And I need silk blouses, no cheap polyester. And I want to try on comfortable shoes, but made of fine leather. Of course, please. Step into the private fitting room. We will bring you some mineral water. Or would you prefer coffee? Water is fine. And I want you to call a cab for when I am finished. I spent the next 3 hours transforming myself. When I looked in the fitting room mirror wearing the gray suit, the ivory silk blouse and the new coat, Leonora, the victim, had vanished. Standing before me was Leonora Montgomery, the matriarch. The cut of the clothes hid my tired posture and gave me a regal bearing. I paid in cash, relishing the almost religious reverence with which they counted the money. I left my old clothes in a bag, asking them to donate it. "Is everything to your liking, Mrs. Montgomery?" the girl asked, escorting me to the door where the cab was waiting. "Excellent," I replied. "And a piece of advice, child. Never judge a book by its wrinkled cover. Sometimes the pages inside are made of gold." I got into the cab feeling powerful, but the clothes were just the disguise. Now I needed the weapon. I went back to the hotel and asked them to send up a phone directory and a laptop borrowed from the business center. I sat at the mahogany desk in the suite. I had to find them. Not to beg them, not to ask for explanations. I had to find them to know exactly where to strike. Roger wasn't smart, and Jessica wasn't either. They were cruel, yes, but cruelty is usually the tool of fools. They had surely left footprints. I opened the laptop. My fingers, though clumsy from arthritis, remembered how to type. At the pharmacy, we had modernized our system years ago, and I was the first one to learn it. I searched social media. Jessica was addicted to posting her life, showing off things she didn't have. I looked up her name, Jessica the Divine. Private profile. Damn it. I looked up my grandkids. The oldest, Kevin, 15 years old, public profile. There it was. A photo uploaded 6 hours ago. It showed a wall painted electric blue, and in the background, through a window, you could see a very distinct water tower with red and white stripes. I smiled. I knew that tower. It was the Oak Creek neighborhood across town, a new subdivision of prefabricated houses that look pretty on the outside but have paper-thin walls. They had moved to the neighborhood for the newly rich, which was actually the neighborhood for the newly in debt. I jotted down the location in a leather notebook I had bought in the hotel lobby. I have the money, I have the image, I have the location. But I wasn't going to go just yet. No, revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had the patience of someone who has waited a lifetime. I needed more information. I needed to know who owned that new house, how much they paid in rent where Roger was working now. I picked up the room phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It belonged to an old customer from the pharmacy, a man who used to be a cop and was now a private investigator. A man I had spotted insulin for his mother for years and who owed me favors. Yeah, a gravelly voice answered. "Sully, it is Leonora, the pharmacist." There was a silence on the other end. "Miss Leo. Wow, it has been a long time. How can I help you? Are you sick?" "No, Sully. I am better than ever. But I need your services. I need you to find out everything about a family that just moved to Oak Creek. Debts, contracts, vices, schedules, all of it." "That costs money, Miss Leo, and it takes time." "Money is not an issue," I said firmly. "And as for time, well, I have all the time in the world. I want you to be my eyes and my ears. I want to know when they breathe and when they cough." "Understood. Who is the target?" I took a deep breath. Saying my son's name as a target left a bitter taste in my mouth, like bile. But I remembered the note on the door. "Without burdens. Roger Miller and his wife, Jessica. Your son, Miss Leo," Sully asked, his voice full of confusion. "My son died the day he left me stranded in an empty house, Sully. This man is just a debtor, and I am going to collect the debt." I hung up the phone, walked over to the window, and looked at the city lights starting to turn on. Down below, the cars looked like glowing ants. I felt massive. I felt dangerous. The invisibility of old age was my cloak. The gold was my sword. And my family. My family was going to learn that a mother is either respected or she is feared. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar. I toasted my reflection in the window pane. "Cheers, Leonora," I whispered. "The game is just beginning." Sully felt so out of place in the Imperial Hotel suite that he didn't even dare lean back against the Italian leather sofa. He held his crumpled hat in his hands and looked around as if expecting security to bust in and kick him out at any second. I, on the other hand, poured tea into porcelain cups so fine the light passed right through them, doing it with the calm of someone born to give orders. "Drink your tea, Sully. It doesn't bite," I told him, sliding the saucer toward him. He nodded and took a loud sip, burning his lips. Then he placed a thick manila folder on the glass table. It was the report. My diagnosis. "Miss Leo, things are uglier than we thought," he started, lowering his voice. "Your boy Roger isn't just a bad son. He is a terrible manager." I opened the folder. The photos were blurry, taken from a distance, but perfectly clear to my eyes, accustomed to reading illegible medical prescriptions. There was the new house in Oak Creek, a modern build, the kind that looks like stacked shoeboxes with way too much glass and too little privacy. "Give me the symptoms, doctor," I joked bitterly, adjusting my glasses. "For starters, they paid for the move with a loan," Sully said, pointing to a document. "And he didn't go to a bank. Roger signed some promissory notes with Vince Gallo." "Do you know who that is?" I felt a shiver. Of course I knew. Vince was a loan shark from the bad side of town who charged 20% interest a month, and if you didn't pay, he collected it out of your kneecaps. Roger had stuck his head in the lion's mouth just to indulge Jessica's delusions of grandeur. "How much?" I asked. $5,000. For the security deposit, the moving truck, and to buy a minimalist living room set the lady wanted. They are already 2 weeks late. Vince already sent 2 gorillas to knock on their door yesterday. I turned the page. There were photos of Jessica. She was wearing new clothes, but in the photo where she was carrying grocery bags, I could make out the brands. Bulk rice, cheap noodles, not a single cut of meat. They were living on appearances. "And the house?" Sully continued, pointing to a photocopied lease agreement. "It is a rental, of course. The owner is a guy named Mr. Harrison, a guy who lives in the capital and is desperate to sell the property because he needs cash flow. Roger swore to him that in 6 months he would buy the house. A lie the size of a cathedral. Because your son just got bumped down to part-time at the car dealership. He couldn't sell a tricycle, Miss Leo." I closed the folder. The silence in the room grew heavy. There it was, the X-ray of my family. A cancer of debt, lies, and pretense that was eating them alive. I could have felt pity. A normal mother would have felt the urge to run, pay off Vince, fill their pantry, and say, "I am here." But I wasn't a normal mother. I was the woman they had left on the curb like an old dog. And when old dogs survive, they learn new tricks. "Thank you, Sully," I said, pulling an envelope of cash from my purse. "Here is your fee, and a bonus. I want you to set up 2 meetings for me tomorrow." "With who, boss?" "First, with Vince Gallo, and second, with Mr. Harrison, the owner of the house." Sully almost choked on his tea. "Miss Leo, with all due respect, Vince doesn't sit down with older ladies for coffee. That guy is dangerous." "So am I, Sully," I replied, tracing the gold rim of my teacup. "So am I." Vince Gallo's office smelled of stale tobacco and cheap disinfectant, a mix that turned my stomach. It was in the back room of a pawn shop downtown. I walked in, leaning on my cane, wearing my camel coat, my leather purse clutched tight. 2 massive guys guarding the door looked at me with mockery and let me pass, assuming I was there to pawn my grandmother's jewelry. Vince was counting bills behind a metal desk. He was a heavy man, his skin shiny with sweat, wearing a gold chain so thick it looked like a dog collar. "You lost, little mother," he said without looking up. "We don't hand out charity here." "I am not looking for charity, Mr. Gallo," I said firmly, sitting down in the plastic chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I am looking to do business. I am here to buy debt." The man lifted his head. His pig-like eyes scanned me up and down, lingering on the quality of my clothes and the steadiness of my gloved hands. "What debt?" "Roger Miller's." I know he owes you 5 grand plus interest, and I know you don't have the patience to collect from a starving loser who doesn't have a pot to piss in." Vince let out a laugh that made his double chin tremble. That idiot. Yeah, I am about to send him a physical reminder. What are you to him? His rich grandmother? Let's just say I am an investor interested in his moral solvency. I lied, keeping my face entirely blank. I want to buy his promissory notes. I will give you the full principal right now. The late fees, I will keep those as future profit. You get your money back right now without getting your hands dirty, and I will handle the collection. I pulled 5 stacks of bills out of my purse, wrapped in rubber bands. I slammed them onto the desk with a sharp thud. The sound of money is a universal language that even brutes understand. Vince stared at the cash. Then he looked at me with a mix of respect and suspicion. "You have a deal, lady, but I am warning you, that guy is a deadbeat." "I know, but I have methods you don't have. I am highly persuasive." 10 minutes later, I walked out of there with the original documents signed by my son in my purse. Now, legally, Roger owed me the very air he breathed. But I wasn't going to collect just yet. Oh no, I would let the debt age like fine wine. Or like slow poison. My second stop was more civilized, but equally lethal. I met with Mr. Harrison's legal proxy in a coffee shop near the courthouse. The owner of the house was desperate to sell. The property had minor foundation issues and needed repairs he didn't want to pay for. Roger, of course, knew none of this. He only saw freshly painted walls and laminate flooring. "My client is asking $200,000, said the lawyer, a young guy in a cheap suit. "I will give you $150 in cash. Immediate wire transfer from a secure account." I countered while breaking a shortbread cookie with my fingers, and on one condition. The current lease agreement stays in place, but the title transfers to an LLC. Apothecary Investments. No one must know I am the owner. The tenant will keep depositing the rent into the same account, which will now be managed by you for me. The lawyer hesitated. 150 was low, but the offer of immediate cash is the siren song of real estate deals. If we close today, you have a deal. But Mrs. Montgomery, why all the mystery with the tenants? I smiled. A grandmother wolf smile. Let's just say I like to monitor my investments from the shadows, and I want to see if they are reliable payers before I introduce myself. That very afternoon, we signed the paperwork in front of a notary. I was now the owner of his roof and his debt. I was the god of his little cardboard universe, and they didn't even know it. 2 weeks passed. The silent execution began on a Tuesday. According to Sully's report, Jessica had organized a housewarming dinner to impress the neighbors in the subdivision. She wanted to get on the HOA board. She had spent the last of her money on cheap catering and forced Roger to ask for an advance at work, which was denied, just to buy wine. I was sitting in my hotel room with the phone in my hand. I dialed the electric company. As the new property owner, I had certain privileges. "Good afternoon," I said in my sweetest, most concerned voice. "This is the representative for Apothecary Investments, owners of the property at 45 Oak Street. Yes, look, we have detected a potential fault in the main wiring that could cause a short circuit. It is a severe fire hazard. I need you to cut the power immediately for a safety inspection." "Yes, right now." "No, do not notify the tenants. It is a technical emergency. I don't want them tampering with anything." I hung up. I checked my watch. It was 7 in the evening. Jessica's dinner should be starting right about now. I would have loved to be a fly on that wall. The next day, Sully brought me the details with a crooked grin. It was a disaster, Miss Leo. The power went out right as they were serving the lasagna. They had to eat by candlelight, but not romantic candles, emergency flashlights. The neighbors left early because it was hot and the AC was dead. Jessica was hysterical, screaming she was going to sue the electric company. "And the best part?" I asked, feeling a guilty pleasure rush through my veins. Roger tried calling the owner, Harrison, to complain. But the number doesn't exist anymore. The lawyer sent him an email saying the property changed hands, and any complaints must be made in writing to the P.O. Box of Apothecary Investments. And did they write? Yeah, here is the letter. Sully handed me a crumpled sheet of paper. Roger's handwriting was shaky. He demanded, he threatened, he played the victim. He said they paid a fortune and deserved respect. I laughed. It was the first time I had truly laughed in a long time. "And what do we do now, boss?" I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city continued its frantic rhythm. I felt powerful, yes, but I also felt a strange hollow in my chest. I was playing with them like a cat with injured mice. Was it justice? Yes. They had condemned me to darkness and hunger. I was just giving them a dose of their own medicine. Now, Sully, we are going to tighten the financial screws. I pulled Vince Gala's promissory notes from my safe. Take these to one of those aggressive legal collection agencies. I want them to start calling Roger at work at all hours. Notify him that his debt has been sold and we demand immediate payment or we will seize his assets. Seize assets. But if the assets are yours, Miss Leo, you own the house. Exactly, but not the furniture. That minimalist living room set, the giant TV, the stereo, all of that can be seized. I want them to feel the walls closing in. I want Roger breaking into a cold sweat every time the phone rings. And Jessica. I have something special for Jessica. I pulled a small business card from my purse. It was from an exclusive fabric store where I had bought my new clothes. Jessica fancies herself a seamstress and a designer. She didn't just criticize my mending, she always claimed she had an eye for fashion. That's right. I found out she is trying to sell clothes online to make some cash. She buys cheap rags and sews fake labels on them. I want you to place a huge order with her. Evening gowns. Tell her you are a middleman for a boutique. Get her excited. Let her spend money she doesn't have on materials. And then, when she has everything ready, you cancel the order. You vanish. You leave her with the inventory and the fabric debt. Sally looked at me with a respect that bordered on fear. You don't play around, Miss Leo. Those are war tactics. They declared war the day they taped that note to my door, Sully. I am just finishing the battle. That night, I dreamed of my old pharmacy. I dreamed I was preparing a master formula. I weighed the ingredients with millimeter precision, a pinch of fear, 2 grams of uncertainty, an ounce of desperation, all mixed in the mortar of loneliness. I woke up before dawn. I felt strong. My arthritis pain seemed to have vanished, as if the adrenaline of revenge were the finest painkiller. I went to the desk and opened the ledger I had started keeping. In the asset column was my gold, my security. In a liability column was the dignity they had stolen from me. There was still a long way to go to balance the scales. Mid-morning, my phone rang. It was Attorney Barnes, the lawyer for the shell company I had created. Mrs. Montgomery, we have a problem. Or an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. Tell me. Your tenant, Mr. Miller, just called the management office. He says he can't pay the full rent this month. He is asking for an extension. He says his mother is very sick and he has had heavy medical expenses. I gripped the receiver until my knuckles turned white, using my name, using me as an excuse for his failures when they didn't even know if I was dead or alive. Roger's audacity had no limits, lying about the mother he abandoned to get pity from an unknown landlord. The white fury crept up my spine again, hot and fast. Not a single day of extension, I said, my voice ice cold. Tell him the contract is strict. If he doesn't pay by the 5th, the eviction process begins. And tell him something else. Tell him the owner of the company is a very strict older woman who despises liars. Understood. Do you want us to proceed with the eviction notice if he misses the payment?
Prep the paperwork, but don't send it yet. I want him to suffer the anticipation. The fear of the blow hurts more than the blow itself. I hung up. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the sweet little old lady. Her lips were a tight line, her gaze hardened. I was turning into something new, something forged in the fire of resentment. I grabbed my purse. I was going out for a walk.
I wanted to pass by the car dealership where Roger worked. I wanted to see him from the sidewalk across the street, see the worry on his face, see him loosen his cheap tie because he felt like he was suffocating. I walked out of the hotel and the doorman bowed to greet me. Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery. Cab number? Today I will walk. I need to see the real world. I walked among the people, invisible and powerful all at once. I held the control of their lives in the palm of my wrinkled hand. I could crush them right now. But that would be too fast. They needed to understand. They needed to learn what it means to be alone, without a roof, without support. They had to find their way, exactly as they had wished for me. Only I was making sure their way was paved with jagged rocks, thorns, and dead ends. And at the end of that maze, when they had nowhere left to run, I would be there waiting for them. Not as the victim, but as fate. The phone in the Imperial Hotel suite rang at exactly 9 in the morning. A civilized hour for bad news, I thought, setting my coffee cup on the porcelain saucer. On the other end of the line was Attorney Barnes, the man running my shell company. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said in a grave tone. The fish took the bait and swallowed the sinker. I felt a cold jab of satisfaction in my stomach, like swallowing a strong antacid. "Tell me the details, counselor. Don't skimp on the symptoms. Your son, the tenant, Roger Miller, just received the wage garnishment notice at the dealership. He caused a massive scene. He screamed that it was a mistake that his mother had money." Barnes took an uncomfortable pause. "They fired him, ma'am. Management doesn't want employees with legal trouble drawing debt collectors to the showroom floor." I closed my eyes for a moment. Roger, my son, the boy whose scraped knees I used to heal with iodine and soft blows of air. He was now out on the street. No job, no money, and soon, no roof. A part of my mother's heart wanted to leap to run and save him. But my mind, that pharmacist's mind that knows some gangrene can only be cured by cutting, that mind kept me anchored to the chair. "And the wife?" I asked, hardening my voice. "Jessica is having a meltdown. The phantom fabric supplier is demanding payment for the materials she already cut and ruined. No one is buying her dresses. They are cornered, ma'am. They have called the office 3 times begging for mercy on the rent." "Good," I said, smoothing the skirt of my gray suit. "It is time for a house call." "Do you want me to go with the eviction order?" "No, counselor. I want you to tell them that the owner of the property, the president of Apothecary Investments, will personally inspect the premises before signing the eviction papers. Tell them it is their last chance to negotiate. Call them in for 5 p.m. Tell them both to be there. And the kids, make sure the kids are not there. I don't want my grandchildren to watch their parents crumble." "Understood. I'll pick you up." "No, I will take my own transportation. I'll see you there." I hung up the phone, stood up, and went to the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me had absolutely nothing in common with the old lady sobbing on an empty kitchen floor a month ago. My white hair was styled in an elegant cut, my hands sported a flawless manicure, and around my neck hung a thick gold chain with a double eagle set in the pendant. As I said, a constant reminder of my source of power. I picked up my cane, the one that now had a silver handle, and my camel coat. "Let's go." Leonora the First whispered to myself. "Today, you are going to teach the most expensive lesson of their lives." The cab I hired wasn't just any car. I requested the hotel's executive service. A black car, sleek and silent as a panther. The driver opened the door for me, and I settled into the leather seat, letting the air conditioning dry the cold sweat on my hands. Because I was nervous. Not out of fear of them, but fear of my own reaction. Would I break when I saw them cry, or would I enjoy their pain a little too much? The drive to the Oak Creek neighborhood was like traveling between two worlds. We left the tree-lined avenues and glass high-rises behind, entering the dusty streets of the new development, where the houses were identical, and the trees were barely dry twigs staked into the sidewalk. Turning the corner onto Oak Street, I saw the house, number 45. The electric blue paint that my grandson Kevin loved so much already looked dull under the unforgiving afternoon sun. There was a strange silence on the block, as if the neighbors knew a tragedy was brewing inside. The car pulled up to the curb. Attorney Barnes was already there, waiting by his sedan with a briefcase tucked under his arm. He saw me arrive and rushed to open my door. "Mrs. Montgomery." He greeted me with a slight bow that did not go unnoticed by the curtain twitching in the living room window. I stepped out of the car. The sound of my leather heels echoed on the concrete. I planted my cane on the ground with authority. "Are they ready?" I asked. "They are terrified," Barnes replied quietly. "They think I am the executioner and you are the judge." They aren't wrong. We walked up to the entrance. Before Barnes could even ring the bell, the door swung open. Roger appeared in the doorway. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt that was desperately trying to look formal. Behind him, Jessica wrung her hands, her makeup smeared, her usually perfect hair tied back in a messy ponytail. "Good afternoon, counselor," Roger said, his voice shaking. He hadn't even looked at me yet. His eyes were locked on the lawyer. "Please come in. We are ready to reach an agreement." Barnes stepped aside solemnly. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, let me introduce you to the owner of the property and the holder of your debt, Mrs. Montgomery." Roger turned his head toward me. His eyes went so wide I thought they would pop out of his skull. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Jessica let out a choked gasp and covered her mouth with her hands. Mom, Roger stammered, taking a step back as if he had seen a ghost. "Mom." I didn't smile. I offered no gesture of affection. I stood dead center in the doorway, blocking the sunlight, casting my long shadow over the laminate floor of their minimalist living room. "Good afternoon, Roger," I said. My voice came out clear, booming, without a trace of an old woman's tremor. "Are you going to invite me into my house, or do I have to wait out here like a beggar?" But, Jessica stuttered, staring at my coat, my jewelry, the luxury car parked behind me. "We don't understand. You were—" "I was what, Jessica?" I stepped into the house without asking permission, forcing them to back away. The smell of stale air and sheer stress was palpable. I was lost. I was dead. I was finding my way. I walked straight to the sofa, that modern gray piece of furniture they had bought with the loan shark's money, and I sat right in the middle, like a queen on her throne. I rested my hands on the silver handle of my cane and stared them down. "Sit," I ordered. They obeyed, instantly dropping into 2 dining chairs across from me, like scolded children in the principal's office. "Mom, for God's sake, what is all this?" Roger tried to scrape together some composure, but the sweat pouring down his forehead gave him away. The lawyer said the owner was coming. "Apothecary Investments." "I am Apothecary Investments," I cut him off sharply. "I am the owner of this house, Roger. I bought the property a month ago when your old landlord was desperate to sell. And I am also the owner of the promissory notes you signed for Vince Gallo. I bought your debt." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Roger went pale, almost green. Jessica stared at me with a mix of horror and cold calculation, her eyes scanning my expensive clothes, trying to add up the numbers. "It can't be," Jessica whispered. "You didn't have any money. You sold the pharmacy years ago. You spent it all. You were a burden." I slammed my cane into the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Watch your tongue, girl," I snapped. "The only burdens here have been you two. For years you sucked my blood, my energy, and my savings. And when you thought I had nothing left, you threw me in the trash like an old piece of furniture." I leaned forward, locking eyes with my son. "Do you remember the note, Roger? 'We hope you find your way, Mom.' Well, I found it. Turns out my way was paved with what you two were too stupid to see." "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice cracking. "The old house. The house you left empty. You took the curtains, the light bulbs, even the trash. But you never looked down. You never had the curiosity or the respect for the past to know what your father and I built." I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the double eagles. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. The gold coin spun on its edge, gleaming with a hypnotic flash, making a pure metallic ringing sound that echoed off the cheap walls of the house. Both of their eyes locked onto the coin. Gold Roger whispered, "That is real. 50 of those, Roger. 50 double eagles your father hid under the pantry floorboards. I was sitting on them while you made me feel useless. I was sitting on them the day you left me alone." Jessica made an instinctive move to touch the coin, but I was faster. I pinned her hand with the tip of my cane. She yanked her fingers back as if she had been burned. "Do not touch," I said. "That is not yours. It was never yours." Roger grabbed his head, pulling at his hair. He started to cry, an ugly, loud sobbing of sheer desperation and delayed regret. "Mom, forgive me." We didn't know what to do. We were desperate. The debts were drowning us. We thought you would be better off with your sister, that she would take care of you. Lies, I yelled, and my voice made the windows rattle. Stop lying. You told me to make a life on my own. You didn't even give me the new address. And the worst part, Roger, the thing I will never forgive you for, is what you did 2 weeks ago. Roger looked up, confused through his tears. What? You used my name. You told the property manager you couldn't pay the rent because your mother was desperately ill. You killed me off and made me sick whenever it suited you. You used me as an excuse for your incompetence while I was alive, healthy, and watching your every move. Roger dropped his head, completely defeated. He had no defense. The shame was a heavy blanket over his shoulders. And now what? Jessica asked, her voice barely a thread. Are you going to throw us out on the street? Is that what you want? Revenge? I leaned back into the sofa, recovering my regal air. I looked around the pretentious house, utterly devoid of love. I could, I said calmly. I have the signed eviction notice in the lawyer's briefcase. I have the defaulted promissory notes. I could take your furniture, the car, and leave you on the curb with your garbage bags, just like you did to me. It would be poetic justice, don't you think? No one answered. Only Roger's ragged breathing broke the silence. But I continued dragging the word out. Unlike you, I don't forget that blood is blood. And I will not allow my grandchildren Kevin and little Sophie to sleep under a bridge because of their parents' sheer uselessness. I saw a flash of hope in Jessica's eyes. Grave mistake. Don't get confused, Jessica. This is not charity. It is a restructuring. I signaled to Attorney Barnes. He pulled a legal document from his briefcase and placed it on the table next to the gold coin. These are the new conditions, I said. First, you stay in the house, but no longer as tenants in charge of your own destiny. The lease agreement is voided. Starting today, you will live here under a conditional use agreement. What does that mean? Roger asked. It means I am lending you the house, but I keep the keys. I can walk in whenever I want. And if I see a single dirty dish, a single bottle of liquor, or hear a single screaming match, you are out. They nodded in utter silence. Second, the debt. The $5,000 plus interest you owe Vince Gallo. You now owe me, and you are going to pay me back every single penny. But Mom, I was fired, Roger whimpered. I know, I had you fired, I admitted without blinking. Roger stared at me in horror, but I kept going. That job was garbage, and you were mediocre at it. Tomorrow morning, you will report to the warehouse at Town Center Pharmacy. I spoke with the owner, an old friend. They need a loader and someone to scrub the shelves. You are going to start from the bottom, Roger. You are going to sweat. And 70% of your paycheck will go directly into my account to pay off your debt. Roger opened his mouth to protest, to say he was a sales manager, not a warehouse grunt, but my glare silenced him. He knew he had no choice. And you, Jessica. I turned to her. She trembled. The fantasies of being a designer and hosting dinner parties are over. Those poorly made dresses you have sitting there, you are going to rip the seams out. You will sell the fabric as scraps. And you are going to get a job, a real one. They need a cashier at the corner supermarket. I already checked. Jessica turned red with indignation. I am not going to be a cashier. What will the neighbors say? The neighbors don't care about you, Jessica. And if you don't like it, there's the door. You can leave on your own. But my grandchildren stay under my supervision, and Roger stays working to pay me back. You decide. A cashier with a roof or a diva on the street? Jessica looked down, biting her lips so hard it almost bled. She gave a slight nod. Third, I said, standing up from the sofa. My knees cracked a little, but I didn't let it show. I want to see my grandchildren every single weekend. They will come have lunch with me at the hotel or wherever I decide. And you will treat me with the respect owed to the matriarch of this family. The old lady talk is over. The ignoring me is over. When I speak, you listen. I picked up the gold coin from the table and slipped it into my purse. Are we clear? I asked. Yes, Mom, Roger said, his voice breaking. He stood up and tried to approach me, maybe to hug me, maybe to fall to his knees. I raised my cane and pressed it against his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. The silver tip gleamed against his unwashed shirt. No, I said softly. Not yet. Hugs are earned, Roger. Forgiveness requires work. Today, we only did business. I turned toward the door. Attorney Barnes gathered the signed documents and followed me. Before walking out, I stopped and looked at the house one last time. It no longer felt like a foreign, hostile place. Now it felt like exactly what it was: my property, managed by employees who required a lot of supervision. "Oh, one last thing," I said without turning around. "I am hosting Christmas dinner this year. It will be at the Imperial Hotel. Make sure you have decent clothes by then. If you work hard, maybe I will buy you something." I walked out into the street where the sun was beginning to set, staining the sky a violent orange. The air felt lighter. I got into the luxury car and closed the door, shutting out the dust and the misery of my relatives. As the car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Roger and Jessica standing in the doorway. Small, shrinking, watching me leave. They were no longer the cruel giants who dominated my life. They were just two lost people who had just collided with reality. I pulled my ledger from my purse. On today's page, I wrote with my fountain pen, "Moral debt partially settled. Total control." I stroked the double eagle hanging from my neck. The metal was warm against my skin. Revenge, I discovered, was not a dish best served cold. It was a dish served piping hot, nutritious, and on a solid gold plate. But only for those who had the sheer nerve to sit at the head of the table. "To the hotel, please," I told the driver. "And put on some upbeat music. Today, I am celebrating my rebirth." The car glided through the streets, taking me back to my ivory tower. While behind me in the electric blue house, my family's real education was just beginning. 6 months have passed since I decided to stop being the old piece of furniture and become the owner of the chessboard. December arrived with that dry cold that sinks into your bones, but this time it didn't find me shivering under a threadbare blanket in someone else's house. It found me on the terrace of the presidential suite at the Imperial Hotel, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that cost more than Roger made in a month during his best years. Watching the Christmas lights decorate the city below, the air smelled of pine and roasted chestnuts. That smell used to make me nostalgic. It made me think of my late Arthur and the dinners I cooked for a family that didn't deserve me. Now the smell of Christmas smells like victory, like a positive balance sheet. I adjusted my glasses and checked my wristwatch, a delicate piece of white gold. Half an hour until dinner. My family should be arriving soon. I smiled at the thought of that word, family. It was no longer an unconditional blood tie. It was now a corporate structure that I managed with an iron fist and a silk glove. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror. The Leonora staring back at me had a straight spine. The silver dye they applied at the hotel salon made my hair shine like the moon, and the midnight blue velvet dress hid the years and highlighted the authority. "You are ready, old girl," I told myself, winking an eye. Today, we close the fiscal year. I went down to the private dining room I had reserved. I didn't want to eat in the main restaurant. I needed privacy for what I had to say. The Viceroy room was perfect. Walls draped in red damask, a long mahogany table, and a roaring fireplace. When I walked in, the waiters stood at attention. "Good evening, Mrs. Leonora. Is everything to your liking?" asked the maitre d', a man who already knew I wouldn't tolerate a single smudged glass. "Excellent, Richard. Pour the wine. The good stuff. My guests won't know the difference from vinegar, but I will." At 8 o'clock on the dot, the door opened. They walked in single file, like scared little ducklings. First Roger, then Jessica, and finally my grandchildren, Kevin and little Sophie. I stood by the head of the table, leaning on my silver-handled cane, observing the details. Always the details. Roger had changed. He looked thinner, yes, but the bloating from alcohol and bad living had vanished from his face. He was wearing a suit I recognized, an old one I had bought him 5 years ago, but it was clean and pressed. His hands, which used to be soft and idle, now had calluses and small cuts. The marks of his labor at the pharmacy warehouse, marks of dignity. Even if he still viewed it as a punishment. Jessica was the surprise. She wasn't wearing anything new. She had on a simple black dress I had seen 1,000 times, but she had added a white lace collar that I was almost certain she had sewn herself. No fake jewelry, no heavy makeup. She had bags under her eyes, the dark circles of a cashier who had worked double shifts in December. But her gaze was no longer arrogant. It was cautious. "Good evening, Mother," Roger said, stepping forward to kiss my hand. The cheek, no. The hand. We had established clear boundaries. "Good evening, Roger, Jessica, kids." My grandchildren ran to hug me. With them, I allowed contact. Kevin, with his 15 years and teenage rebellion, squeezed me tight. Sophie hung from my neck. "Grandma, you smell rich," the little girl exclaimed. "I smell like success, my darling," I whispered in her ear. "Sit down. We have a lot to celebrate." The dinner went by with a strange formality. At first, you could only hear the clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain. Roger and Jessica ate eagerly but politely, terrified that if they made one wrong move, I would take their plates away. "How is the work at the warehouse, son?" I asked while cutting my filet mignon. Roger wiped his mouth with the linen napkin before answering. "Hard, Mom. The year-end inventory is brutal. I had to carry boxes of cough syrup all day. Mr. Martin says I am slow, but that I am organized." I nodded in satisfaction. Martin was my friend, but he didn't hand out compliments for free. Order is the foundation of wealth, Roger. If you can organize boxes, you can organize your life. And the payments? Prompt, Mrs. Montgomery. Jessica chimed in, keeping her eyes on her plate. 70% of his salary and 50% of mine were deposited into your account yesterday. I brought the receipts. She pulled a small envelope from her purse and placed it on the table, sliding it toward me between the candelabras. I took it without opening it. "I trust the bank, Jessica, but I am glad to see you have learned discipline." "And you, how is the cash register?" Jessica sighed, and for a second I saw the vain woman trying to claw her way out, but she pushed it down. "It is exhausting. People are rude. They yell at you if the price is wrong. They throw their money at you. My feet ache from standing for 8 hours. "Welcome to the real world," I said, taking a sip of wine. "That is exactly how I felt behind the apothecary counter for 40 years to pay for your indulgences. People are rude, yes, but the money you earn with those aching feet is worth more than any handout I could ever give you." There was a tense silence, but it wasn't hostile. It was the silence of learning. When dessert arrived, a Yule log covered in chocolate, I decided it was time for the final reveal. I gave a signal and the waiters left, closing the double doors behind them. "Very well," I said, placing my hands on the table. "We have reached the end of this turbulent year. You tried to get rid of me. I rebuilt myself. Now the accounts are settled. But a family, or what is left of it, isn't managed solely with ledgers." I pulled 4 gift boxes from under my chair. They weren't huge. They didn't have extravagant bows. "For you, Kevin." I handed him a flat box. The boy opened it. Inside was a savings account book in his name and a small gold coin. A fraction of a double eagle. "Grandma, this is real gold," he said, his eyes wide. "It is your future, Kevin. That account holds a college fund. I am the primary account holder until you turn 18. But the gold is yours. I want you to keep it, to feel its weight, to understand that money isn't just paper you blow on designer sneakers. Money is security. It is freedom. Don't be like your father. Be like your grandfather, Arthur." Roger lowered his head in shame, but he didn't say a word. He knew I was right. "For you, Sophie." I gave the girl a box with a set of professional watercolors and sable hairbrushes. "I have seen your drawings at school. You have talent. Don't let anyone tell you art is useless, but don't let anyone support you either. Paint your own world, my child." Then I looked at the couple sitting across from me. The tension dialed up. "Roger, Jessica, there is no gold for you. Not yet. Gold is earned. It is not inherited by divine right." I handed them 2 envelopes. Roger opened his. It was a legal document. He read it frowning, and then he looked at me in disbelief. "A life insurance policy." "A life insurance policy in my name," I corrected, "where you two are the beneficiaries. But with a trust clause. If I die tomorrow, you don't get a single penny in cash. The money goes to an administrator who will pay for the kids' education and issue a modest monthly allowance for you. Provided you maintain steady employment. You are protecting us from ourselves, Roger muttered. For the first time in years, I saw admiration in his eyes, not just fear. Someone had to do it. Since I failed to teach you that when you were a boy, I am teaching you now that you are an old man. Jessica opened her envelope. Inside was a brochure and a payment receipt. Course in haute couture and industrial pattern making, she read. I saw the collar on your dress, Jessica. You have skilled hands, even if you spent years using them for idleness. Stop sewing fake labels onto cheap clothes. Learn how to make real clothes. The course starts in January. It is already paid for. It is at night, so it won't interfere with your cashier job. Jessica stroked the paper. Her eyes welled up with tears. This time, they were real tears. Thank you, Leonora, she said, her voice cracking. No one has ever invested in me. They only gave me money to keep me quiet or to look pretty. Beauty fades, my girl. A trade stays with you. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sweet exhaustion. I had achieved the impossible. I hadn't just recovered my fortune and my dignity. I had recovered something much harder. I had straightened the crooked tree of my family. With harsh blows of reality, yes, but it was straight. Now listen to me very carefully, I said, hardening my voice one last time. The fact that we are having dinner here does not mean the debt is wiped clean. Tomorrow, Roger, you go back to loading boxes. Tomorrow, Jessica, you go back to the cash register. The house is still mine, and I still hold the keys. But if you keep this up, if you prove you are made of the material I think you are, maybe, just maybe, next year we can talk about partners instead of employees. Roger stood up, walked around the table, and stood next to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his rough, calloused hand. Thank you, Mom, for not letting us find our way into the abyss. Thank you for forcing us to walk yours. I patted his hand. It was the only gesture of affection I allowed myself. Sit down and eat before the chocolate melts. The dinner ended with timid laughter and stories about the kids' school. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like an old piece of furniture in the corner. I was the center of gravity. I was the sun around which these stray planets revolved. When they left, I stayed alone in the room for a moment. The waiters started to clear the table. I walked over to the window. I pulled the velvet pouch from my purse, the one where I kept my lucky coin. The first double eagle I pulled from that rusted toolbox. I held it up against the moonlight. I thought about the cruel note they had left on the door. We hope you find your way, Mom. That sentence, which was meant to be my death warrant, had become my treasure map. I had found my way, yes, but I had also discovered something far more important. Old age is not the end of the road, unless you decide to sit down and wait for death. I had decided to stand up. I had decided to fight. And in that fight, I discovered that my 78 years were not a burden. They were my armor. Arthur's gold gave me economic power, that is true. But it was my cunning, my experience as a pharmacist, my ability to measure the exact doses of punishment and reward that gave me true power. I left the room and walked through the hotel lobby. The pianist was playing a soft melody. The guests greeted me with respect as I passed. Good evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Good evening. I went up to my suite, took off my orthopedic shoes, and sank my feet into the Persian rug. I poured myself a small glass of anise, just the way my husband used to like it. I sat in the armchair facing the floor-to-ceiling window. Down below, the city continued its frantic rhythm, full of people running, buying, going into debt, living on appearances. Out there somewhere, in the new subdivision, my son and my daughter-in-law were sleeping, exhausted, worried about waking up early for work. They were alive, they were learning, and I was fulfilled. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I no longer saw an old woman. I saw a matriarch. I saw a woman who had turned abandonment into an empire and loneliness into sovereignty. I raised my glass to my own reflection. Cheers, Leonora, I whispered. The climb was brutal, but the view from the top is unbeatable. I drank the anise in one gulp, feeling the heat travel down my throat, comforting and strong. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank to review the returns on my investments. The day after tomorrow, maybe I would buy that commercial space I saw downtown to open a haberdashery and let Jessica manage it if she finished her course. I had plans. I had a future. I left the glass on the table and turned off the light, leaving myself only with the glow of the city and the comforting weight of the gold in my memory. I got into bed, slipping between those Egyptian cotton sheets that smelled of lavender, and I closed my eyes with a smile that wouldn't fade all night. Because in the end, they were right. I found my way, and it turned out to be a road paved with pure gold and an iron will.